All right, welcome to today's webinar, the first one of our series of the winter and spring of 2025. And today we're going to go through Propels on a very survey level and covering a number of solutions that you can fulfill with Propels. I'm Dustin Froyum. I'm one of the co-founders, and I work with our alliances function. And today I have my co-presenter, Vince Ray, our co-founder and CTO as well. So hi, Vince. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'll just give just a really brief background on VirtualZ if you're new to us. So VirtualZ is a mainframe software company that is really the first Native American and woman founded and led ISV software company around the mainframe ever. And Vince also has Native American heritage as well. And then in our senior leadership team, we have over 200 years of mainframe experience. And so, yeah, if this is the first time joining us, welcome. If not, welcome back. All right, a little bit about our agenda today. So we're going to talk very, very briefly about the challenges with legacy ETL and some of the data movement and integration solutions out there. But most of the time, we're going to focus on Propels and the capabilities of Propels and all the solutions that we can fulfill with that. And some of the advantages of using Propels. And then we'll have time for some Q&A and conclusion. So I think this will be anyone that's been around the mainframe for a while, this will look pretty familiar around how you had to share data and get data out of the mainframe really out of necessity prior to some of the solutions that we're bringing to the market. Some of the challenges with this, right, is you have to extract those files. You have to decide where you're going to transform them. Is that going to be on the mainframe? Is that going to be in the cloud or distributed environment? And then the resources to get that across the wire as well. So let's just talk a little bit about some of these challenges. So resource intensive, like I said, if you're doing that ETL process today, a lot of those solutions take costly and precious mainframe general processing capacity. So that extraction, if you do the transformation on the mainframe, you know how resource intensive that can be. We see typically 15 as high as 40%. We've heard 40% a number of times. Just ETL activities taking up general processing capacity. So that's an enormous cost to the customer that needs to do that. Lack of agility. Often some of these, again, out of necessity, were homegrown solutions and had to put together a number of different processes to get to the desired result. Disaggregation, struggling with integration, as well as how do you get multiple data sources and targets at the same time to integrate. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can solve that. And then security. If you are doing legacy ETL, you can lose control of your data. And a lot of the times those are not very mainframe centric. So at least our ETL and data integration remain mainframe centric. And then you can decide what data you want to share with the target environments. So let's get right into it. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of the base part of Propels and the use cases that supports around data integration. Just if you want to share ETL, a whole file, do you want to get it into a database for AI and ML capabilities, or you want to do some storage type things with Propels? So Vince, can you talk to us a little bit about the base architecture and advantages and how Propels works and is maybe a little different than legacy ETL or some other products in the market that focus on ETL?
Yeah, no, happy to spend a minute on that. So, first thing to understand is PropelZ is mainframe software. It executes on ZOS. It's a zip eligible workload, and it's direct to the target. So it's not like there's an intermediary tier involved or an application on Windows or Linux or in the cloud or any of that stuff. Propels runs on ZOS, connects to the target that you want to put that data in, and it's straight path through. So that's what tends to give us the the high throughput that we have. There's no as I said, no intermediary steps. It's directly from ZOS to the target. It's very flexible in terms of what you can target. We use industry standard JDBC protocols, and virtually every database out there has some type of JDBC interface. Out of the box, we deliver 5 that I'll call certified. So MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, Postgres, and Snowflake are the 5 that you'll find in the box, ready to go. No configuration needed to use any of those. And but really, any other database, probably 100 different databases are easy to connect, just by using the JDBC interface. You can, certainly we'd be happy to do that work for you. You're also welcome to do it yourself if you care to. It's just a matter of configuring the correct JDBC drivers. One of the other keys to Propels is that we also include our transformation engine here. So we can do things like read, let's say a VSAM file, which is just big blobs of records. And we can break that down into rows and columns, and those rows and columns are what you'll see in the target database. So instead of just getting almost like a file transfer approach where you see blobs of records on the target, you see the record broken down based on however many fields you have. And the only thing you need to do that is something like a COBOL copybook that describes the layout of the records. So a lot of flexibility there. You can get the data into the format that you want. You have control over things like indexing and some of the database features on the target, and it makes it really easy to go from let's say VSAM data to something that you can feed into your favorite BI tool, or really anything that can ingest relational data that way. So very open-ended that way. You can run it interactively. It's very easy to integrate with things like batch processing. So, you may have a workload that creates a certain file once a day, and really what you want is a copy of that file in, I don't know, an Oracle database in the cloud. Very easy to add an extra step to that job, have Propels do its thing. And now you also always have the latest, greatest version. If that's not good enough for you, if you want to do more of an incremental thing, we can do that too. We can process, I'll pick on VSAM, we can process by keys or ranges of keys. So if you've got the kind of file that's maybe a transaction history with timestamps in it, it's really easy to say, run every, I don't know, half hour and just pick up the records that have been created in the last 30 minutes based on those timestamp fields in the records. So, that makes it possible that, you don't have to deal with what might be terabytes of data. You only have to deal with the updates since the last time you ran. That's definitely helpful if you're looking for near real-time incremental updates. The only delay there is how often you run Propels. If you want once a minute, once every 5 minutes, once a day, all of that's possible. So Dusty, did I miss anything major that we should cover? Oh, Dusty, you're muted.
I am muted. So Vince, yeah, just one, we are So Propels is zip eligible, 90+%, right? And then can you just talk a little bit about, we can do multiple targets, even multiple clouds, right? We can duplex, is that correct?
Yeah, and that's probably the most important thing in Propels is we're neutral in terms of the database we connect to. The actual syntax of the database queries and how we do all of that is exposed as configuration data. So that means you can go to any database. You could go to many databases in parallel. Propels is completely neutral on that. And by the way, I'll just point out that's obviously the big traditional relational databases, but it's also things like MongoDB or some of the things that we think of as NoSQL environments. Most of those also have JDBC interfaces and can work here. And again, you're doing all of this just by running the software that we provide. There's no code you have to write. There's no kicks transactions to go fetch data, none of that. It's just point to the file, point to the target, and it just works. I mean, we've spoken to customers who are doing this in other ways, and they just can't really get their heads around that you can be up and productive in literally minutes with Propels. People are often used to spending weeks reverse engineering data formats and figuring out how to connect to different targets and writing, MQ transactions or, whatever they're doing for this stuff. None of that's needed with Propels. Just pick it up and run is the idea here. So yeah, most important thing. It's if you need a little bit of data in the cloud, today Propels is the way to do that.
Thanks, Vince. So we're going to kind of rapid fire some of these solutions and use cases that we have. I mean, Propels has become really extremely flexible and a very high value product, especially we'll talk a little bit about the pricing of Propels. But let's talk a little bit about tape migration and storage. So Vince, maybe, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the migration piece first. Can you kind of share what your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So this use case comes directly from some of the customers that we've spoken to. Many of them have things like, I have a virtual tape library with maybe hundreds or thousands of tape volumes in it, and I want to get that data to the cloud one way or another. It's significantly less expensive, and that especially if you're on something like VTL hardware, the cost of that and the maintenance of that and all the other things that go into that can be really problematic. It's not really just the dollar cost, it's the care and feeding and the time and the upgrades and the patching and everything else that goes into that. So one of the things that we've talked about is we can take Propels, and then using an inventory of your tape data, we can run Propels against really all of your data, serially, and populate it into really whatever cloud target that you want. So, that's a really trivial approach, and it lets you go to, as I said before, 100 different targets, depending on, where you need that data and what you're hoping to do with it once it's in the cloud. You can also go the other way, using that approach. You might need to pull some of that data back to your mainframe. We can help you with that as well, and essentially recreate the original tape data sets that you started with. So just from a storage point of view, that's a huge savings. It's a relatively straightforward migration. It's let me be clear, it's not overnight. Often there's a lot of data to process through, but it's an easy, straightforward thing that doesn't impact a lot in your organization that way. I guess the second use case that we talk about here is really that same idea, except instead of just moving those tape files kind of intact to the cloud, we use Propels and the data transformation component that I talked about to really transform that data into a format that makes it much easier to deal with on other platforms. So if I'm looking to do reporting tool, or something like Tableau, or whatever your favorite BI software might be, I take that tape data, and instead of just storing it as mainframe EBCDIC blobs, I go through PropelZ data transformation. Now it's neatly formatted, rows, columns, normalized data, and it's accessible with SQL queries. So any application that knows how to do SQL processing against that data can work with it, and that's a huge value add if that's what you're trying to do. If you're also trying to move your applications in addition to the data, often what you're going to end up with is, well, do I want to do kind of file IO, open, close, read, write, or do I want to do SQL queries? And a lot of times, SQL query is going to be the preferred solution there, and this helps you get to that with all of your tape data. Oh, Dusty, you're muted again.
Sorry about that. So Vince, if they're just wanting to use this for tape storage, they're not retiring their mainframe, they're not replatforming or refactoring an application. How would that work?
Yeah, I mean, normally we would work with the customer. I mean, there are a lot of variables there, like, how do we access the inventory of tape files? That might mean integrating with your tape management system. The customer might run CA1 or TLMS or IBM's RMM, or really whatever they might have. So we would help them develop something, a scripted kind of a solution that gets that inventory of files, and then really it's just running Propels once per tape file. Often we'll do that in parallel, depends how much bandwidth and everything else are there, but those are the details. It becomes big long running task, and when it's done, your data has been copied to the cloud. So again, if you're starting with VTL hardware, and maybe it's replicated and you have that hardware and 2 or 3 or 4 sites, I mean the cost of all of that pretty much goes away. You can use the facilities of the cloud provider, let's say Amazon or Microsoft, to achieve that kind of fault tolerance and replication. You don't necessarily have to do it in your own data center that way. So yeah, and in that case, if you were to look at the data that gets stored in the cloud, they're blobs. In other words, you'd see a record and you'd see, bit for bit, the same data you started with on your tape files. That's nothing lost there, nothing transformed, just purely stored in a database format that's easy to access no matter where you want. And as I mentioned, if you ever need that back on the mainframe, it's straightforward to run a PropelZ utility that brings that back from the cloud and creates either a local data set on disk or tape on your mainframe.
So Vince, we've got a kind of a foundational question before we move on to the other use case. So just to make sure, Propels moves ZOS data to non-ZOS databases in the cloud or on-prem, right? And Vince, I don't think it has to be. I mean, that is a core use case, but it doesn't have to be. It could go mainframe to mainframe as well. We've had that come up. You just want to
Yeah,
confirm that, Vince?
yeah, absolutely. The target could be, let's say DB2 on another in
Mhm.
another data center, another LPAR, wherever you want. Doesn't have to be non mainframe that way.
And then, um, so the target can be, we can store it as a blob, or we can, as you said, really transform it into the any of those JDBC targets, rows and columns, non-SQL databases, etc.
Yeah, and again, your blob might be, I mean, maybe that's what you want. Maybe you have applications that know how to process that blob today and you want to preserve that. But if you're trying to get that data into, some of the other tools I mentioned, BI tools, reporting tools, that kind of thing, you probably want to transform it. You probably want to break it down into its individual columns. So instead of one big, let's say 4K blob, you see, name, address, social security number, whatever the fields of your records are. And not just populated that way, but stored in the correct format. So you might have, I don't know, a mainframe packed decimal field that has some particular value that will be stored as a correct numeric type based on the database that you're going to. So, all of that's, I mean, that's the real core value of Propels, that we know how to do all of those transformations. It starts out as, mainframe floating point number. It gets stored in this particular database as, whatever that database expects as a floating point number. So yeah, there's no information lost that way. It just gets to be a lot easier to work with that way.
So Daniel, just um, yes, Daniel, that yeah, ZOS to ZOS is possible and trivial, as you say. So please let us know if we didn't answer your question. Okay, Vince, let's rapid fire through. We can take a little bit more time on the streaming management data. That's a little bit different. And then I know we have archiving or storage, similar to the tape story of management data. But let's start with the streaming aspect, because I think this is pretty cool.
Yeah, one of the, and again, this is based directly on feedback that we heard in talking to customers. One of the use cases we hear all the time is, it's not really file information I want to take to the cloud. I want to take management data, SMF records or console logs, or things along those lines. So Propels is structured so that I mean, up till now, I've been talking about the inputs are always files. And in fact, you see it on the graphic here, VSAM, QSAM, et cetera, et cetera. But it turns out that Propels can actually accept anything as input. So one of the other pieces that we've developed of this puzzle are things like real-time SMF listening capabilities. So we can capture SMF records in real time as they're produced, feed them through Propels, and then store that data. Exactly as I described. It could go anywhere, could go to any of the target databases we're talking about. And not just SMF data, but, same thing for console messages or, other types of mainframe management data. So, one of the examples we show of this is, there are plenty of, even open source system log integration tools. If you're running, let's say 100 Linux systems, it's tempting to take all of those system logs and integrate them together so you can view them in, one application. There are several of these in the open source community. Some of them are super popular. So we can do that with Propels. We can take your console message traffic and write that data to a open, database of your choice, where it can be ingested into any of these kind of systems that I'm talking about. So now you might see all of your, let's say your Windows messages, your Linux messages, your ZOS messages in one application, in a way that lets you leverage some of these open source tools in new ways. And certainly there are high-end management tools that can do similar kinds of things, but they're normally very expensive. They're normally big commitment to that type of thing. In this case, we're able to do it with nothing more than Propels and a little bit of add-on that feeds that kind of data through Propels. Now, one use case here, beyond that, is sometimes you just want to store that data. Things like SMF data is precious to a lot of sites. A lot of sites are keeping SMF data, 7 years, 10 years, uh, God knows how long. So, that gets to be a costly thing to do on ZOS, however you do it. So again, you can use that method I just described to archive that data to the cloud. And now I've got as much data as I want in the cloud where it can be replicated. I mean, I can even do things like, one copy goes to Microsoft, one copy goes to Amazon. So I have, those acting as kind of, fault tolerant replicas of one another that way. And then, of course, behind the scenes, you can use all of the capabilities of these platforms. So that data can be encrypted. Within Amazon, maybe you want multiple copies of it available. You can absolutely do all of that. And again, the cost of that tends to be pennies on the dollar versus some of the alternatives that are purely ZOS based. So yeah, I think those are interesting use cases too, and it makes it much easier to integrate that management data with tools like whether it's Splunk or Logarithm or Sumo Logic or any of those kinds of applications get to be a whole lot easier when you can get that mainframe management data in the cloud without having to kind of do unnatural things and have agents installed in all of your LPARs and all of that kind of stuff.
All right, thanks, Vince. All right, one last quick one here, report migration.
Yeah, and again, another use case we heard loud and clear from customers. The way this got started was customer had a big investment in local mainframe report storage and viewing, and they had years and years of report data, tying up all kinds of mainframe resources, and they wanted to migrate to something more modern than that. I believe in this specific case it was an Adobe-based solution they wanted to get to. The issue was, it was pretty easy to get new stuff into that environment. The issue was, how do you get all of that legacy stuff into this environment? So, same idea that we would use Propels with the idea that we can feed it data from virtually anything. In this case, we used utilities that came from the Mainframe's report management tool to access the data, basically as text, and then feed that into Propels, store that in really whatever set of targets the customer wanted. Once it was there, it was accessible to their viewing applications and all the other things they wanted to do with it. So they're able to migrate new workloads, went and did kind of more modern things, but there was no loss in the legacy data. The legacy data was brought into that new platform without having to abandon anything or write a lot of code to figure that out. And again, this is zero code. This is just stringing together Propels with some utilities that allow us to access the data. So again, very flexible, and it shows the kind of things that sound really hard to do, but turn out to be pretty straightforward once we sit down and look at the use case in some detail.
Okay, thanks, Vince. So just a note about our pricing. I think anyone's been around mainframe ISVs for a long time, like we have, you'll know it can be very difficult to find how the vendors prices their products. We're extremely transparent about that. We publish it on our website. So in this case, Propels is priced as, we call it utility pricing. So it's a flat $50,000 per year. No install limits, no MIPS limits, LPARs, sysplexes, data volumes. It's literally $50,000 per year for the enterprise. And it ships with those drivers that Vince had mentioned. If there is another driver you want us to optimize with Propels, we're happy to do that. That's a very nominal, additional cost, $5,000 to $10,000, depending on the driver. And we can do that. So extremely cost effective, especially when you look at all the different use cases and utility that Propels has. All right. I can, if you want to raise your hand, if there's any questions, I can open up your mic and we can we can take some questions at this point. Vince, I did have one though. So, we've got some emerging patterns around, we're getting asked about a lot of IMS to other targets. I know we've talked quite a bit about VSAM, and that can be a really tricky thing as well. Even DB2 to Snowflake. So can we support those patterns as well, Vince?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this a little bit, but I mean, the usual model of Propels is, files are input. Propels does its thing, including the data transformation, and the output is a database. But it turns out it doesn't have to be that. For instance, in my example of SMF data, what we're really doing there is just running something that knows something about SMF, knows how to connect and access that data in real time. And then that data is piped directly into Propels. There's no VSAM file, there's nothing like that. It's just a pipe between what we're picking up from the SMF stream and what and then Propels can do the rest of what it does. So same is true for things like IMS or DB2 or Database or any other source on your mainframe. We're able to execute something that can get the records from that environment. And frequently all that is just a utility of some sort. And just to pick on DB2 a little bit, that might just be a DB2 batch query that's select asterisk from whatever table you want. And then the output of that is what goes into Propels. Ultimately, that's what Propel sees. And it doesn't care if it's working with that or VSAM data. Works exactly the same way. It's just a different source of output. So really, it's completely open-ended as to where the inputs are. And by the way, same is true on the output side. We're talking about databases, but if you had some need to, instead of putting data directly to a database, send, I don't know, a Kafka transaction, you could do that too. It's that same exact idea. Let Propels do its thing, and then the output might be, instead of database row, it might be an XML document or a JSON document that gets fired into something that could push that through an API of some sort. So it's open on both ends that way. It's any input source, any output source. The input source, I'll just add a little bit to that. It doesn't even have to be ZOS data technically. One of the things that's built into Propels is we can use things like SFTP to go fetch data from just about any platform or any cloud environment and pull that in as input as well. So, it really is kind of any to any, by going through Propels that way. So, if you wanted to, talk to us about, I've got, I don't know, some data in a mainframe space that I need to get out to the cloud. That's one use case. If I want to go the opposite way, if I want to take a cloud database data and go to mainframe files, technically we can do that kind of thing as well. It's really, very, very open-ended that way. To us, the most common use cases are what we talked about. It's, I got VSAM data or, some type of file data on my mainframe, and I want to get it to a database. The demo you'll see online, we have a VSAM file that has information about all of the world's airports, and we want to do some Tableau reporting on that. Now, in this data are all sorts of data formats, floating point numbers for latitudes and longitudes, and binary numbers and packed decimal numbers and text that's encoded in EBCDIC. So, we use the data transformation I've talked about. We run Propels and, no exaggeration, 5 minutes. We have, I believe in the demo, we do a MySQL version of this where, we just point Tableau to it and we're generating charts and graphs and here are the geo-referenced charts. Here's the map of the U.S. where all the major airports are, and so on and so on and so on. And I mean, literally, it's not like we did that demo and then somewhere hidden in there's 2 weeks of work. We did that demo in well under half an hour, start to finish, and that included creating the target database, all of the stuff that I described. So that's really, at least to me, that's one of the sweet spots. It's just so easy to move that kind of data around in ways that used to be really painful. So, it's not like, in my background, as a, technology manager, I used to go to our IT folks and ask for custom reports for this, that, or the other thing. And often I would get told, okay, come back in 2 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it was. And, the poor folks who did this for a living, they would have to figure out where's the data, how do I join it together, how do I write the code, put it in the format that Vince needs. And, and that's really what we're attacking here. Make that kind of a no-brainer, and all of a sudden a lot of those things get to be a whole lot easier to do.
Okay, thank you, Vince. Any final questions? All right. So if you want to take a deeper dive into some of the solutions we talked about, we have many of those on demand. And then also we have the upcoming series as well. You can find that on the event section of our webpage at virtualzcomputing.com. And we have a number of other resources. So a lot of blogs, podcasts, demos on demand, as Vince mentioned. If you want to request an eval for yourself or for a customer, we have a lot of resources there. And I would check out our solutions page too, because that goes into some of these solutions as well at a deeper level. Okay, thank you for joining us for this first one of 2025, and look forward to you joining us on a future webinar.